Apple Bloom, in her half-awake state, suddenly felt a cold glass being pressed against her lips. She instinctively opened her mouth to drink, quickly swallowing what she believed to be water. It only took a few sips to realize, even in her groggy state, that what she was drinking wasn't water at all. For one, it had a sort of metallic aftertaste, and for another, there were small bits and pieces in it that sort of resembled... At once, she was wide awake, coughing and spitting out the last of the fluid in her mouth. She'd been bound to some sort of wooden table with leather straps. She saw Cheerilee standing next to her, holding a glass filled with a red liquid, grinning wickedly at her. I thought you'd like it. Scootaloo made it herself, you know. She really poured herself into it, you could say." The mayor cackled maniacally as horror flashed across the filly's face. "Scootaloo, you, killed her? Oh, yes, afraid so. She was the first to go, you know. And you're the last," the mayor said, feeling uncharacteristically chatty. The filly turned pale. "You killed all of them?" "Oh, goodness, no," she replied, grinning as relief spread over the filly's face. "I didn't kill snails. That was all you. The way you made that spotlight, or sun, if you wish, fall down on him. Glorious." Tears filled Apple Bloom's face as the realization hit her that all of her friends were gone, and that her fate wasn't likely to be any different. "Why?" she managed to let out as Cheerilee picked up a knife and held it up to the light appraisingly. "Why? Because you all deserve it. Each and every one of you is a blight upon this land, a weed in my garden, and it's time to end it," the mayor said coldly as she positioned herself at the end of the table, near the filly's hind legs. "So, shall we start?" Slowly and carefully, the mayor made an incision above the filly's hoof, cutting neatly around the circumference of her leg. Apple Bloom tried to squirm, but the leather straps effectively held her in place as they dug into her skin. Cheerilee slipped the knife under her skin and carefully cut loose the skin from the filly's flesh. The pain was more immense, and the filly clenched her teeth and refused to acknowledge it, every bit as stubborn as her sister was, not wanting to give Cheerilee the pleasure of hearing her scream. Cheerilee obviously thought that she had cut enough for now. As she took hold of the flap of skin, she cut loose with her teeth. Slowly, she pulled it up from the filly's legs, ripping more of skin off as she went, filleting the filly alive. Despite her brave effort, this was simply too much for any pony to endure quietly, and Apple Bloom's screams rung out throughout the empty complex. Cheerilee continued making new incisions every time she accidentally tore more skin off completely, and then continued filleting from there. Pretty soon, half the filly's leg was a bloody heap of bare flesh, every little twitch going through the exposed muscles, an agonizing experience, blood dripping from everywhere. But still, Cheerilee showed no signs of stopping, as she continued cutting and filleting, slowly moving up. Eventually, the filly's entire leg was a disgusting, skinless mess. Cheerilee sadistically breathed on it for a while, making Apple Bloom quiver in pain. A little light sparkled in Cheerilee's eyes as she bowed down and extended her tongue, slowly dragging it all the way from the filly's hoof to her flank. For a moment, the mare thought the screams that followed would deafen her permanently, before she pulled her tongue back into her mouth and savored the taste. You're quite good. Want a taste?" she whispered in the filly's ear. "But, Buck, you, the cutie mark crusader managed to stammer. Cheerilee laughed, amused by Apple Bloom's defiant nature. This one may be able to take some more punishment yet. She diligently started cutting up the filly's other leg, making a long incision along the length of the leg this time, peeling the skin off towards the side instead of upwards. The filly still tried to resist and keep up appearances, but she slowly started sobbing and quivering as the pain became too much for her to bear. Her breathing soon became ragged as her skin turned pale, as her vividly scarlet blood coated the floor. As she gained more confidence with the knife, her movements started becoming quicker, and in one fluid moment, she had cut the skin from the filly's left flank, and then moved right over to cut the skin off of her right. She picked up the 2 pieces of skin with her teeth and held them before the filly's eyes, before tossing them aside. Saw those? That's where your cutie mark would have been, if you had one. You never will now. Guess your crusading days are over. This realization finally did what the pain was unable to do. It shattered the filly's last vestiges of resistance. From one moment to the next, she started crying loudly, her body shaking wildly, using up more energy on that than she should have. Cheerilee started cutting out strips of skin on the filly's chest until the word weed was spelled out there. By now, the filly had lost enough blood and wasted enough energy that her responses started to become sluggish, ruining some of Cheerilee's fun. She started poking a knife into a few pressure points, but her reaction was so underwhelming that Cheerilee shrugged and decided to call it quits. She undid the leather straps and pulled a tub from out under the table, the exact same one she had squeezed Scootaloo out into earlier. And Scootaloo was still there. Not wanting to simply wait until Applebloom bled out, the mare pulled her off the table by her hair and dropped her straight into the tub. The blood and pieces of gore suddenly surrounding her stung her bare flesh, and she let out a soft hiss. As Applebloom took in the scent of the blood and saw an eye drifting slowly by, she realized, just then, what she had been dropped into. This notion seemed to renew her strength, as she scrambled to get out of the tub, but Cheerilee would have none of that. She grabbed the filly by the hair with a hoof, and forced her down into the pool of blood, keeping her mouth and nostrils under it. The filly screamed, swallowing a mouthful of Scootaloo in the process, as she thrashed her hind legs wildly, splattering the contents of the tub everywhere, air bubbling up from her mouth, but Cheerilee kept her there firmly, ecstatic to see the filly's struggles die slowly after. As Applebloom's lungs started to burn more, she involuntarily started to breathe anyway, filling her lungs with gore and blood. After the last erratic twitch of her legs, Applebloom remained motionless. The fuchsia-colored mare waited a few more seconds before finally releasing the filly. Applebloom's mutilated body just kept lying still in the pool of blood that had once been Scootaloo, and Cheerilee knew her task had finally come to an end. All that was left was to simply clean up. She sat back and cried tears of joy, overcome with emotion as she realized she might finally get her life back on the rails now, with a new class next year, a class of nice fillies and colts, instead of the monsters she had had. She felt proud to have played her part in making Equestria a better place, proud to have protected the future generations from poisonous influences that would have hampered her growth, which in turn would have hampered others. The consequences would have been quite dire, to say the least. Humming a cheerful tune, she went to get cleaned up at once, and then went over to her stash of flammable liquids. It'd take some time by herself, but she'd get the job done. She felt like she was walking on clouds, and nothing could stop her now. Fire sprung up all around her, stopping her right in her tracks. She realized too late that she had not thought this through. She'd spread flammable stuff everywhere, and then lit a few fires in different places. But she had underestimated the speed at which the flames would spread. And now she was here. Not too far from the exit, but unable to proceed due to the problem she had created for herself. She backed off into the center of the room, as far away from the flames as possible. But as soon as she got there, she already had to jump out of the way of a burning crossbeam, which only barely missed her. Various patches of fur on her body were already singed from flames she had just barely dodged, and soot and ash had covered her from the tip of her hoof. Smoke started to fill the room, and Cheerilee felt herself slowly suffocating as every breath she took drew more of it into her lungs. As her breathing became troubled, she laughed softly, wondering if her day of liberation would also be the day that she died. She consoled herself that a noble death after having completed her mission was still infinitely better than the life she had been living before, in a world where those colts and fillies were still alive. Just as she started to think the situation was hopeless, a burst of purple light exploded from the exit ahead, wood splintering in the explosion. Surprisingly, the blast seemed to have sucked the life out of most of the flames between her and the exit. So, summoning the last of her strength, Cheerilee made a beeline for the exit. As she got closer, she could hear voices talking to each other urgently. Worry thick in their voices. "Do it again, Twy! Do it again!" Ugh, that took a lot out of me. I don't think this is the best way to... Cheerilee burst outside of the burning building, smoke trailing beside her, and she collapsed onto the grass outside the theater complex. Immediately, several ponies rushed forward to help her, and as she looked up she saw Twilight Sparkle, Rainbow Dash, Pinkie Pie, Applejack, Rarity, and Fluttershy standing there, with concerned looks on their faces. "Are you okay? Where are the children? I teleported us all here when I saw the smoke," Twilight said, and the other 5 nodded. Cheerilee opened her mouth, her voice hoarse and crackling from the smoke as she spoke. "They... inside. Fire. No idea. How," she said, but the effort took a lot out of her. "Shoot! We can't wait. We need to get in there now!" Rainbow Dash cried out. "Just wait," the Purple Mare replied calmly. "I can see other ponies crossing the river already. Pretty soon we..." But Rainbow Dash didn't listen. Utilizing her trademark speed, she dashed all the way through the flames and disappeared into the building, quickly followed by Rarity and Applejack, who were both yelling the names of their respective little sisters. What now?" Fluttershy said shakily, as she and Pinkie Pie waited for Twilight's direction. "Form a bucket line," the unicorn commanded. The other 2 ponies quickly dashed off in the direction of the river to organize the other ponies in one long line. As the first buckets got passed out to the front and thrown on the fire, both Cheerilee and Twilight could see their efforts were in vain. The water didn't seem to make any difference, as bucket after bucket was thrown onto the fires. And yet, just as they kept getting bigger and hotter. From where she lay on the ground, Cheerilee suspected that any evidence against her might already be long gone, but she wasn't willing to take a bet. Suddenly, the purple pony seemed to get fed up with waiting and worrying about her friends, and an idea came to her. She called upon her magical reserves, straining herself to the maximum as her horn began to glow more and more. The ponies watched in awe as a purple trail of light sprang up between the river and the theater, and the river started to alter its course. In a matter of seconds, a wall of water suddenly rushed forward at the theater walls, crushing everything in its path. Cheerilee was hit by a rush of panic. This just might be enough to put out the fire. She shouldn't have worried. Although the unleashed fury of the river did indeed put an effort to the flames, it also washed away the weakened theater building itself, smashing it all against the ground. As Twilight, exhausted, stopped applying her magical might to it, the water of the river started to recede, dragging a lot of the rubble and the like with it. Twilight looked around the disaster area fearfully for a few moments, but breathed a sigh of relief as her three friends climbed out of the rubble, battered, bruised, and a little singed, but otherwise okay. But the fillies and colts they'd been looking for were nowhere in sight. Twilight threw a few questioning glances at her friends, but they all just shook their heads as tears filled their eyes. Nobody had managed to find them in the inferno. As the reality of the situation hit them, their emotions got the best of them, and they let themselves go into tears. They were quickly joined by the weakened Cheerilee, who shed tears of pure relief. A week or two had passed since the incident, and a lot had happened. Several investigations had looked into the cause of the fire, but the fire itself and the water that followed had destroyed anything that could have given the investigators even the slightest clue. Cheerilee always looked confused and heartbroken whenever she got questioned, claiming that she was taking care of something on the other side of the complex when the fire broke out. Although some ponies wondered if this could be considered some form of negligence, no official complaints were filed against her. The cleaning effort had been ongoing for an entire week, and even now, bits and pieces of rubble turned up here and there. During the weekend following the disaster, a joined burial ceremony was held for all the colts and fillies who had died at once. Although all the caskets had been filled with stone and belongings of the dead, since none of their bodies had been found. Every pony got very emotional, including Cheerilee, who cried tears of joy as her struggle finally came to an end. A lot of ponies came to tell her that it was okay, and things would be alright, or that it wasn't your fault. Cheerilee constantly had to take care not to accidentally respond to those in the wrong way, so she was quite relieved when it was finally over. And so, 2 weeks passed. Cheerilee grunted and moaned, sweating profusely in the warmth of the sun. It had taken her a lot of effort, and she'd certainly be sore in the morning, but she didn't care. She'd finally done it. She took a few steps back to admire her work, and marveled at the perfect state of her garden once again. There and then, she made a solemn vow, a sacred pact with herself. I, Cheerilee, will never let any weeds take over my garden, ever again.